They mocked him for mopping floors. But when the company collapsed, he rebuilt it from scratch. As their new boss, "Hi, my beautiful family. It's your Mr. Harry. Today, I want to tell you a story that might just change the way you look at people forever. We live in a world where your worth is often judged by the clothes you wear, the title on your badge, the floor you work on. But what if I told you that the man mopping the floor today might be the one signing paychecks tomorrow?" This story isn't about wealth. It's about respect. It's about quiet strength. About how the ones you overlook, the ones you laugh at, are sometimes the ones who are just waiting for the right moment to rise. So don't click away. Don't skip this. Because by the end of this story, you just might find yourself rooting for the janitor, the one who taught the world that greatness doesn't always wear a suit. With all my love, let's begin. The hallways of Blake Corp were made of glass, steel, and silence. The kind of silence that makes some people feel powerful. But for Ethan Cole, it was the sound of being invisible. Every night at 10 p.m., while the executives were long gone and the lights dimmed low, Ethan would push his old cleaning cart through the halls. His uniform smelled like bleach and hard days. His hands were cracked from scrubbing bathrooms. No one ever thanked him for, and yet he never complained. They called him the mop guy. They spilled coffee on the floor and looked him in the eye as they walked away. They left their trash on conference tables during meetings about respect and culture. They never asked his name, never wondered why a man with eyes that sharp worked a job so small. But Ethan remembered everything. Every project folder left behind, every PowerPoint presentation on the whiteboard, every backhanded comment he heard when people thought he couldn't understand, because while they judged him by his uniform, he was silently studying their entire kingdom 3 years earlier. Ethan had been an engineering student at MIT, a scholarship. Kid smart, driven, quiet. But when his mother fell ill in insurance, didn't cover her chemo, Ethan dropped everything, college, future dreams, to take care of her. He applied to 47 jobs. Only one called back. Janitor Blake Corp. So he took it. And every night after wiping down desks, he'd sit in the back of the company auditorium and read the leadership training binders that employees left behind. Don't just clean the room. His mentor, Walter Green, the older janitor, used to say, "Learn the room. Know who walks in, who walks out, and what they leave behind." One evening, as Ethan scrubbed the floor near the 14th floor break room, a voice cut through the air. "Why are you still here, janitor?" It was Brad Whitman, mid-level sales manager, with more ego than empathy. He dropped his coffee cup right next to Ethan's bucket, intentionally. "Oh," Brad smirked. "Look at that. Clumsy me." Ethan said nothing. He just picked up the cup, placed it in the trash, and kept mopping. But in his mind, he added one more name to the list. Later that night, as the building emptied and the lights hummed softly, Emily Parker, a young intern, lingered at the elevator. She watched Ethan clean. "You're too smart for this job," she said, trying to be kind. "Why don't you work upstairs?" "It's with the real team," Ethan smiled. But it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm exactly where I need to be right now," he said. "Sometimes the best view of the system is from underneath it." She looked puzzled but said nothing. The elevator doors closed, and she disappeared into the night. At 2:17 a.m., Ethan stood alone in the executive boardroom. Moonlight poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked out at the city skyline and then down at the carpet beneath. His shoes. The same shoes he wore every night, worn out, silent. He walked over to the CEO's chair. He didn't sit in it, not yet. Instead, he placed a single sticky note on the polished wood desk. It read, "Clean floors today, clean house tomorrow," and then he left. Because some men wait for an opportunity, but others quietly build their own. The walls at Blake Corp were thick, but not thick enough to hide the sound of fear. Started with whispers in the executive wing, something about missed earnings, unfiled taxes, angry board members. The stock price dipped 1%, then 2%, then 9%. By the end of the week, Blake Corp's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. But Ethan Cole didn't need headlines. He'd already seen the collapse coming from the basement. Every night, polishing chrome door handles and vacuuming conference room carpets, Ethan had overheard enough. Through vent shafts, open windows, and careless conversations, he saw the nervous glances, the shredded memos, the empty bottles of scotch in the CEO's trash. But it wasn't until he walked past the server room one night and saw Richard Blake, screaming into a phone that he knew the kingdom was crumbling. Richard Blake, the man whose name was on the building, had been siphoning company funds through offshore accounts. The CFO knew, so did two VPs, but none of them had the guts to report it. They were too busy hosting luncheons and selling dreams to investors, and Ethan, he was the invisible man with a mop and a memory. That night, as Blake slammed the door behind him, Ethan reached into the janitor's closet, opened a small toolbox, and pulled out a USB recorder. He hadn't planned to use it, not yet, but something in the air told him it was time. 2 weeks later it happened. The morning news flashed with sirens and scandal. Blake Corp under federal investigation. Richard Blake stepped down voluntarily. Stocks plummeted. Offices emptied like someone had pulled the fire alarm on an empire. One by one, the people who once walked past Ethan without a second glance left the building with boxes in their hands, shame in their eyes. Brad Whitman was one of the last to leave. As he passed Ethan near the service elevator, he scoffed. "Well, looks like your dream job's over too, mop boy." Ethan didn't reply. He didn't need to. That night the building was silent. Not the kind of silence that hides power. The kind that tastes like ash. Ethan walked through the lobby one last time, his reflection following him in the black marble floors. He stood beneath the company's silver logo, traced the edges with his eyes, and remembered everything. Every insult, every laugh behind his back, every meeting he wasn't invited to. He walked up the executive stairs. No one was there to stop him anymore. He entered the empty boardroom, opened his bag, pulled out a thin folder, the one with copies of the fraud logs, offshore wire transfers, and silent approvals. He left it on the table under the company's seal. No name, no note, just truth. Then he walked to the center of the room, stood where Richard Blake once shouted at junior staff, and slowly turned in a circle, taking in every inch of it.
Ow. The leather.
Chairs. The echo in the corners. The smell of wasted power. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "It's done." And as he stepped out of the building that night, the last person to ever leave Blake Corp's headquarters, he turned around once more and looked up at the tower. The lights were out. The glass walls reflected nothing. And in that cold silence, Ethan Cole made a promise to himself. They built this place on greed. I'll build mine on everything they never understood. Then he disappeared into the night. But this time, he was not walking away. He was walking toward something. Ethan Cole didn't start with money. He didn't start with an office, a team, or a trust fund. He started with a borrowed laptop, a garage that leaked when it rained, and the quiet rage of a man who had spent years being overlooked. The garage belonged to a friend, the only one who hadn't vanished after Ethan dropped out of MIT. There was no sign on the door, no furniture, just an oil-stained floor. It's a space heater in the heartbeat of an idea. Ethan named it Novacore. He chose the name carefully. Nova for new star. Core for the center of something unshakable. He wasn't just building a company. He was building a blueprint for every person who'd ever been dismissed, talked over, underestimated. This company wouldn't be built by suits and spreadsheets. It would be built by people like him, the ones who've been told to stay quiet and stay small. He started recruiting quietly. The security guard who once worked nights with him. The woman who cleaned hospital rooms and understood workflow better than most managers. The dishwasher who coded on his lunch breaks. Ethan trained them himself, not just in systems, but in confidence. Every evening he'd teach business strategy on a whiteboard made from a broken shower door. He didn't pay them with money at first. He paid them with belief, and somehow belief was enough. For a while, days turned into months. The heater died. They worked in coats and fingerless gloves. Power outages became planning sessions by candlelight. But no one quit. Because when Ethan spoke about Novacore, it didn't sound like business. It sounded like purpose. Then came the pitch. Ethan had one chance to get Novacore funded. A private session with Claire Donovan, a razor-sharp venture capitalist known for building giants and destroying pretenders. She walked into the garage in heels and a storm gray coat, looked around at the scattered papers, the stained walls, the mismatched chairs, and smiled. "This isn't a company yet," she said. "It's a declaration." Ethan looked her in the eye and replied, "That's exactly what it is." He showed her the model efficient, scalable, humane company that paid attention to the people at the bottom first. Software that was faster and smarter because the people building it actually knew what frontline work felt like. Claire didn't ask many questions. She just listened. When he finished, she stood up, extended her hand, and said 6 words Ethan would never forget. "I think it's time you were heard." The funding wasn't massive, but it was enough. Enough to move out of the garage, enough to get real hardware, enough to hire people who'd been passed over by every polished resume. Filter in the city. Ethan put out a hiring post that read, "Did they tell you you weren't qualified? We'd like to talk to you." Thousands applied. Within a year, Novacor wasn't just running, it was gaining speed. Startups started whispering about it. The ex-janitor company, the misfit firm. But behind closed doors, investors called it something else, the quiet threat. Ethan didn't care what they called it. He cared that for the first time in his life, people listened when he spoke. Not because of what he wore, not because of his title, but because his words came from a place they understood, and so did his. Mission because Novacor wasn't just a company, built by underdogs. It was a storm forming in silence. The city didn't notice Novacor at first. It was just another small startup trying to survive in the shadow of old giants. But then something shifted. It started with a contract, a logistics optimization deal with a regional supplier. Nothing flashy, but Novacor delivered results. In half the time at a fraction of the cost, word spread. Quietly, powerfully. Investors started asking questions. Who's running this? Where did this guy come from? But the answer was always the same. Some janitor. Ethan Cole didn't seek attention, but attention found him. Tech blogs posted headlines like "From Mop to Market Leader." A photo of him went viral, standing in a simple gray hoodie. No watch, no ego. Surrounded by a team that looked more like a second family than a corporate staff. They called him the founder who listens. He didn't care for the title. What mattered to him was that Novacor was hiring people who used to be invisible. And now, they were building something unstoppable. That's when it happened. Brad Whitman applied for a job. He didn't recognize the name on the interview schedule. Didn't remember Ethan Cole. Why would he? He'd been too busy laughing at him, too busy calling him Mop Boy. But times had changed. Blake Corp was dead. Brad needed work. His LinkedIn profile was a polished lie. Suits still expensive. But his confidence, cracked. He walked into Novacor's downtown office. Glass walls. Open floors. Plants hanging from the ceiling. And there, across the interview table, sat Ethan, calm, collected, wearing the same eyes Brad had once looked through, not into. Brad blinked. "Have we met?" Ethan didn't flinch. "You used to work at Blake Corp sales, right?" Brad laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, back in the day. Hell of a place, huh?" Ethan nodded. "You spilled coffee on the floor outside the break room once? Made a janitor clean it up?" Brad paused, color drained from his face. Ethan leaned forward, eyes sharp. "That janitor was me." Silence fell like a hammer between them. Brad started to stammer. Apologies, excuses, something about stress, high-pressure culture. Oh, misunderstandings. Ethan held up a hand. "I'm not here for your apology, Brad. I just have one question." Brad nodded, grateful, desperate. Ethan asked, "Why do you want to work for a man you never thought was worth speaking to?" There was no answer. Just shame. Meanwhile, in another room, Emily Parker waited for her own meeting. She had grown since the days of her internship. She'd remembered Ethan's words about seeing systems from underneath. Now she wanted to be part of something that didn't just make money, but made meaning. Her interview was short. Ethan smiled when he saw her. This time, she didn't see a janitor. She saw a builder. "You were right," she told him.
Ow.
"We're never out of place. We were just blind." Ethan didn't reply. He just handed her a badge. Welcome to the real team. That night, news broke. Novacor had just closed a deal with a Fortune 500 firm, the kind Blake Corp used to brag about. The same media outlets that once ignored Ethan now raced to interview him. But he declined. Instead, he returned to the office alone, turned off the lights, and stood by the window. Watching the skyline, no champagne, no speeches, just a whisper. This is what quiet storms sound like. The tower stood just as tall as Ethan remembered. Same glass panels. Same stone lions flanking the entrance. But it didn't look as intimidating now. In fact, from where he stood across the street, it looked smaller, like an overconfident statue that had finally been humbled by time. The Blake Corp logo had been torn down a year ago, leaving behind faint shadows on the concrete. Ghost of power. Now, a new sign was going up. Novacor headquarters. Ethan hadn't planned it this way. He never meant to buy the building where he used to scrub floors and collect trash. But when it went up for auction, and no one wanted it, too much scandal, too much baggage, he didn't hesitate. He signed the papers with steady hands, walked through the front doors with steady feet, and this time, every step echoed like thunder. He made no announcement. No press release. The only thing he changed was the energy. Cold boardrooms were replaced with open lounges. Executives had to walk past the entryway where janitors cleaned. No one was invisible here anymore. He took the top floor, not to be above anyone, but because it overlooked everything he used to be beneath. The view wasn't what made it special. It was the memory of who he used to be when he stood at the bottom. Ethan walked the hall quietly that first morning, touching the same elevator buttons. Running his fingers along the wall where he used to lean on long nights. He passed the break room, freshly painted now, and thought of all the spilled drinks. The whispered insults, the people who didn't bother to learn his name. And then, he paused at a door that had once been locked to him, the executive office. Stepped inside, looked around, finally sat in the leather chair at the head of the room. He wasn't pretending anymore. He belonged. Not because someone allowed it, because he built something no one could deny. Later that week he called. In Walter Green, his old mentor, the man had retired last year, tired knees and calloused hands. Forgotten by the very building he helped maintain for 2 decades. Ethan brought him in for coffee. "You remember this place?" Ethan asked. Walter chuckled. "I remember every floor tile still creaks near the east stairwell, I bet." Ethan smiled and handed him an envelope. Inside was a job offer, Director of People and Culture. Walter blinked. "You want me to lead?" "No," Ethan said. "I want you to teach. They forgot what it means to listen to the ones at the bottom. I need someone to remind them." Walter nodded, emotion pooling behind his glasses. "I never thought I'd see the day. You helped build it," Ethan said. "You just didn't get credit. Now you will." That afternoon, Ethan walked through the lobby as employees entered for orientation. Some were wide-eyed. Some carried lunchboxes. A few wore the same blue janitor uniform Ethan once wore. He stopped when he saw one of them, a quiet kid with shy eyes and shoes 2 sizes too big. He was wiping the edge of a glass panel, just like Ethan used to. Ethan walked over, took the rag from his hand, and helped him polish the last corner. The kid looked up, confused. "Sir, you don't have to do that." Ethan smiled. "I used to be you." The boy's eyes widened. "You were the janitor." Ethan looked around at the building, the people, the empire. "No," he said gently. "I am the janitor. I just learned how to clean bigger messes." That night, he returned to the executive floor, stepped into the boardroom, and looked out over the skyline. The city shimmered with lights, like stars refusing to go out. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, old, folded, faded. The sticky note he'd once left on a desk. "Clean floors today. Clean house tomorrow." He pressed it against the new CEO nameplate on the door and whispered, "Tomorrow has arrived." And for the first time in years, he let himself exhale. Not because he had power, but because he'd reclaimed his name in the very place they tried to erase it. Ethan. Cole didn't believe in revenge. At least not the loud kind, the kind that made headlines or crashed parties. His was quieter, slower, sharper. He believed the best kind of payback wasn't served cold. It was served calm, with silence, with a smile, and with undeniable results. That's why he waited. He waited until Novacore was no longer just growing, but thriving. Until it was valued higher than Blake Corp had ever been. Until every news outlet that once ignored him now begged for interviews. He opened the drawer of his old desk, the one he used to clean around, not sit behind, and pulled out the folder. The same folder that once brought Blake Corp to its knees. It's the proof of fraud, the unfiled audit trails, the quiet approvals. He had kept it safe, untouched, not out of spite but purpose. He didn't call a press conference. He just emailed it. To the right people, financial regulators, media, former investors, no signature, no subject line, just truth. And truth, as it turns out, doesn't need an introduction. Within 72 hours, Richard Blake was trending again, this time for formal charges. Embezzlement, tax evasion, conspiracy. The empire he once ruled over had become a courtroom. Brad Whitman was called in for questioning too. His LinkedIn went silent. His emails went unanswered. Ethan watched it unfold like a man reading the final chapter of a book he already knew the ending to. There was no joy in it, only closure. Meanwhile, Novacore was being called the future of ethical business. Claire Donovan stood beside Ethan at the company's annual summit, raising a glass in front of a cheering audience. To the janitor who never stopped learning, she said, to the man who didn't just build a company, he built a new way forward. But Ethan didn't. Hear the applause. His eyes were on the far corner of the room, where a young woman, a new intern, was sitting with a notepad, taking notes, unnoticed. She reminded him of himself, quiet, curious, observing everything from the edge of the room. Over and handed her a card. She looked at it. Never stop watching. Never stop building. She smiled nervously. Thank you, sir. Ethan nodded. One day you'll understand what that card really means. Later that night, the office was empty. It's just Ethan in the moonlight again. It's the same scene as years ago. Only now, the silence didn't feel like isolation. It felt like peace. He walked through each floor one last time. Not as a farewell, but as a ritual. A reminder of every lesson he learned along the way. He paused at the janitor's closet, now converted into a quiet lounge space for staff. He opened the door, walked in, and just stood there. Same size. Same smell. But now, different energy. He whispered, I started here, and I'd still start here again. Back on the executive floor, he sat at his desk. No gold nameplate, no assistant outside the door. Just a sticky note framed on the shelf behind him. Clean floors today, clean house tomorrow. It wasn't just a motto, it was a map, because the real payback wasn't lawsuits or headlines. It wasn't taking down Blake Corp. It wasn't watching the men who mocked him finally kneel. The real payback was proving he never needed to shout to be heard. He just needed time, and now the whole world was listening. Hi, my beautiful family. This story wasn't just about mops or meetings. It was about how the world often looks down on the quiet ones, the overlooked, the ones who speak less, but no more. But just because someone starts small, doesn't mean they were meant to stay there. Ethan Cole didn't fight for fame. He didn't scream for respect. He simply walked his path with patience, with pain, and with purpose. And in the end, the world couldn't ignore him anymore. So, if you're out there, feeling unseen, unheard, underestimated, this story is for you. Keep building, keep believing, because one day, they'll turn around and realize you were never behind. You were just getting ready. If this story touched your heart, please let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today. Don't forget to rate it from 1 to 10 below. This is your Mr. Harry. With all my love always. Till next time.